Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Victorian Cowboy, and welcome back to the sixth installment of our The Witcher Blood of Elves book club. The Blood of Elves is written by Andrzej Sapkowski, and today we're looking at the first half of Chapter 2. The next video will be the second half of Chapter 2. So, in this first half of Chapter 2, it's told from the perspective of Triss Merigold. And one thing I will say this book is doing very well is alternating the perspectives from which the story is told. I really like that narration technique. So it's third person limited for the most part, which is really nice. So Triss Merigold is on her way to Kaer Morhen, and she comes across this witcher running on this trail, which is known as the Trail, or the younger witches refer to it as the Killing. Because it's this really intensive way for them to train. And it turns out that this is actually Ciri. And everybody who's read the books, you get this lovely theatrical irony, a dramatic irony, where we know what's going on. We know that it's Ciri who's training, but Triss does not. Now, I do want to point out that the fact that Triss is alive and well is interesting, and I'm wondering how this is going to be explained later on, seeing as in the prequels, and it's hinted at especially in this chapter, she died. She was killed as one of the 14 sorcerers defending the city from the Nilfgaardian invasion at the Second Battle of Sodden. So the last book or the last short story in The Sword of Destiny has Geralt visiting the obelisk and seeing her name there and everything like that. So knowing that, the fact that she is here, this is after this Nilfgaardian invasion and the battles, and she's running into the characters is very interesting. I do want to point out that the fact that Kaer Morhen is so difficult to find now is really fascinating at the beginning of the chapter, and then when it's explained why there's a moat of bones and skulls and whatnot, it makes more sense. The fact that a series of fanatics decided that the witches were mutants and aberrations and abhorrent in the eyes of their one true deity caused them to come and have this massacre is unfortunate, and I'm wondering how Ciri will respond once she learns that. Granted, it's understandable nobody wants to talk about this. It's a horrible thing. Though I don't think they're doing her any favors by not telling her this. Though apparently the witches aren't putting her through, say, the trial of grasses or things like that. So they're preserving her from the genetic mutations while still training her in like fencing and physical endurance and whatnot, because that's what they know how to do, according to Geralt there towards the end. So, I mean, it's really cool to see some of the training aspects and the fact that they are treating her respectfully but still giving her necessary skills to survive. Because in this world, if you don't know how to use a sword, you're completely dependent on the skills of others, and I think it would be smart to learn how to take care of yourself, because then you're not wholly reliant on somebody else to protect you. What's interesting is that Triss points out in the beginning that there's been 25 years without having new Witcher recruits. So Ciri is the first person running that course who's not a full-grown Witcher in 25 years. That's a long time to go without finding a new individual to continue sustaining the system. And the question becomes, is it that there's so few witches out there to try and bring children back to train? Is it that there's just, ever since the massacre, such disgust for witches? Or is it that the likes of human beings are expanding so greatly that they don't need to rely on witches as monster hunters anymore, because they've got the armies or the willpower, the infantry to do it themselves? So I think that's something that would be interesting. What's nice is the relationship we see between Triss and Ciri starting to form. I think that's a fun relationship to look at, where Triss is trying to feel out what Ciri is capable of, and Ciri, who's been living with these 4 or 5 witches who are these generally ageless gentlemen. They tend to be older or on the older side because of the mutations. This is her first encounter in 6 months, 7 months with another female. So I'm really curious to see how this works out, and whether or not the witches are going to have Ciri train with Triss or continue to be the traditional witch sense and see if they have her go through the trial of grasses. Now, one thing I want to point out is Ciri has this like wave of magic that comes into her and allows her to call Triss out on being alive, even though she should be dead, and there's a grave marker for her there at the hill at Sodden. So the fact that this spirit possesses Ciri but she can't remember it, my question is this something Ciri is capable of, or is it just something that, being a child, she's open to, and it allows the spirit to come into her and take control and do these things? So with that in mind, it'll be curious to see how magic affects her throughout the rest of the story. Also, it's going to be really interesting with whether or not this is a benevolent spirit that came to finesse her, or, as Triss points out, it's a very evil sounding metallic voice that's omniscient. And like, my question is, going over the bodies of the fallen, whether the spirit of death came to talk to Triss because death is now cheated of some major prize in this death of Triss Merigold. And as you know, the idea of the death with the blue eyes, and as we know, Geralt encountered death at the top of the obelisk for the 14. So seeing this, and what's nice is, even if you haven't read the prequels or the short stories which act as prequels, like, they hint at enough stuff that you can piece this together. Although Geralt, like, knowing Geralt met with death, not necessarily, but a lot of the other stuff, so Triss's death and whatnot is hinted at enough that not having read the prequels does not do you any harm. But just seeing the repercussions of cheating destiny, and whether or not, if this is really cheating destiny, or if this is her destiny, because destiny and fate is a major theme in this. What are you in, like, what do you have in your power? How much of what you do is destined, or how much of what you do is within your destiny to control? I feel like the idea with destiny there is you can't cheat it, because if it's destined, then it's already preordained. But I mean, it's really not something I've thought about much until I've started talking here. But the idea of how much of destiny is already preordained. So one could say that Geralt starts believing in destiny because he cannot escape the child. He cannot escape Ciri, who survived the Battle of Sintra, the massacre of Sintra, and Geralt happened upon. So that's really interesting. It's still very fascinating for me to hear them describe Kaer Morhen, especially in its state of ruin and kind of despair, and how, for me, I think it parallels the Witcher Order itself, and how it's kind of fallen off. Notice the 25 years without recruits and whatnot, and how it's like, these are the vestiges of a bygone age, and the witches themselves are. So everybody still knows what they are, but they're not as prevalent as they once were. Also, it's interesting to see Geralt through Triss's eyes, because Triss is viewing Geralt as somebody who has aged a lot, even though physically he hasn't. But, like, mentally and emotionally, and all of the things he's been through have aged him. Though we do get to see some of Triss's and Geralt's backstory together, and how apparently they were once lovers, because that's what Triss is envisioning again, and what she's hoping to happen there, at least in some sense. We don't quite know why she's there yet, but to some degree she's there because she feels this deep... She feels something for Geralt, we can see that. And whether it's purely a physical attraction or more is yet to be seen. And of course, Triss is able to piece together that Ciri is in fact the princess of Sintra. And so there's definitely some issues that Geralt and Vesemir recognize around this in their attempts to protect Ciri. And so they're really quick to end that conversation, at least to begin with. So we'll have to see what's going to happen here. Also, I just find one other point interesting, is that she refers to Vesemir as grandfather. So this insinuates that there's much more of a relationship between her and Vesemir, and the fact that she's been to Kaer Morhen apparently multiple times and whatnot. She's got this relationship with the Witcher Order, or at least this particular sect of them, and has this relationship with both Geralt and with Vesemir. So I'm really curious to see what this relationship is. I wonder how much more they'll talk about happened before, or how much of it we'll just see in their current interactions. Thank you for reading along with us. Thank you for following along with the video series. I really appreciate it. I'm really enjoying doing this series. We'll make sure we have another video there. Sorry about that noise. I forgot to turn my phone to silent. That being said, please join us next time. We appreciate all the feedback. And have a good one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our video. We do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, give us a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you thought, and as always, have a good one.